Hey guys, welcome to the piece Hat KAL. I am Alexandra from Two of Wands, and this is the piece hat that I've designed. It is part of Lion Brand Yarn's new campaign called Hat Not Hate, which is an anti-bullying campaign. And the point is for everyone to start making blue hats and wear them throughout the month of October, which is Worldwide Anti-Bullying Month. So this hat specifically, I wanted it to kind of represent lots of different backgrounds of people coming together in peace and supporting each other. So that is what we're going to be doing. And in this first video, we're just going to go over the materials, some basic stuff about the pattern itself, and then we're going to start working the ribbed edge, which I folded over here. It's actually a little bit longer than it looks. So yes, let's begin. This is the pattern, which I've printed out, and the pattern is free on my blog, twoofwands.com, but you can also purchase a really inexpensive printable PDF without the ads. This is $2.50, and it's for sale on my site as well as on Etsy and many other platforms that I sell patterns on. It's up there across the board. So what we're going to do now is go over the materials. The main body of the hat is worked with Lion Brand Wool Ease in the color denim. So that is going to be the base. And then I chose 3 different colors of Vanna's Choice to be the different colored hands that are done with duplicate stitch and embroidery at the end of the pattern after the hat is actually made. So we're not going to be working in tarja or stranded knitting. It's basically just an embroidery technique if you're unfamiliar with it. Duplicate stitch is just where you will thread on a strand of one of the colors of yarn onto a tapestry needle, and then you literally just embroider over the existing stitches of the hat to create the colors. So we've got the 3 colors of Vanna's Choice here in beige, taupe, and linen for the hands. And then we're going to be working the hat on these US 8 5mm circular needles, which are 16 inches long. That's pretty standard for a hat. We will also need a stitch marker to keep track of where our rounds begin, a tapestry needle, and we're also going to need this pom-pom maker, which is actually optional. I'm going to show you guys how to make a pom-pom using just your hands, but this does make it a little bit easier. So if you want to purchase one of these, this is by Clover. I think it's their medium-sized pom-pom maker that I used for my hat. And then just some standard materials. I've got a pair of scissors, this measuring tape, and this little gauge measuring tool, which as you can see is very used and very old. I can barely even read the instructions on it anymore. Okay, yeah, so that's what we're gonna need. The hat itself, it will measure, it's about 18 inches circumference, but as you can see, it's super, super stretchy, so this should fit a wide variety of head sizes. It's pretty standard for an adult-sized beanie. If you can see on the pattern, the gauge is 18 stitches by 25 rows, equals 4 inches in stockinette. So that means that if you have one of these little tools, it makes it really easy to measure your gauge, or you can just use any sort of ruler or measuring tape to measure it as well. But to measure your gauge across the stitches, you just lay it on top and you count how many stitches, how many little V's you have within the 4 inches. And then you do the same thing with the rows, where you're counting how many rows you have for your 4-inch measurement. And it's pretty important to do a gauge swatch when you're starting a fitted project like a sweater or something like that. But hats, you know, unless you're totally using a very, very different yarn, or you want to use a different size needle, or you're an extremely tight knitter or an extremely loose knitter, I generally don't swatch for a hat. But, you know, might be a good idea if you've got some extra time this week to work up a little swatch and measure your gauge just to make sure that it is on point with what the pattern illustrates, which again is 18 stitches by 25 rows. And I often notice that people are measuring their gauge across the 4 inches, but basically they're casting on this number of stitches and then measuring and knitting for 25 rows and then actually measuring that to see if it equals 4 inches, which I would recommend doing a gauge swatch that's several more stitches and rows than what the pattern illustrates, because sometimes edge stitches will curl under and they're not necessarily the same width as every other stitch, and the same with the beginning, the cast on edge and the bind off edge. So I would definitely try to make your gauge swatch bigger than 4 inches so that you have a nice big piece of fabric that you can measure across. I just think that that's a little bit better to determine that you've got the correct gauge. So I would just like to take a peek at the pattern before we begin, because I think that's a smart thing to do. It's something I always try to do before I dive into something. So front page here, we've just got our materials list, the finished size, and the gauge. Page 2 lists the different abbreviations that I'll be using in the pattern, and those include CC for contrast colors, which we won't get to until the end. That just means these colors here. CO for cast on, K for knit, K2 to get tog for knit 2 together, MC for main color, which is blue, P for purl, rep for repeat, and STS for stitches. So there's a little note here that says pattern is worked from the bottom up on circular needles. That means that we're going to be working from this bottom edge up to the top of the hat with our circular needles, and then the color work is done in duplicate stitch and embroidery after the body of the hat is complete. Then so to begin, we're going to cast on 80 stitches onto our circular needles and join in the round, and then we're going to work this ribbed cuff first. So this is about 4 inches, and then after we've finished this ribbed portion, we're going to just knit stockinette all the way up to the top. The full hat measures about 12 inches tall. And then we're going to just work 2 decrease rounds at the very top. Then we're going to use our tapestry needle to thread the tail onto it and draw it through all the stitches and pull it like a drawstring. There's a few different ways of shaping the top of a hat. This is just like a cinch technique where we're kind of just gathering it all to one point. But you can also do a shaped crown where you're working decrease rows as you reach the top of the hat, and it would make the fabric more flat here, so it wouldn't be gathered at the top, it would just be shaped. And then we're going to work these 3 little peace sign hands with duplicate stitch, as I said. And then we're going to do a little bit of a back stitch embroidery over the hands to give them a little bit more definition and make them look a little bit more like hands. Because when I first started this, I showed it to a bunch of people, and actually this looked a little bit too much like the Playboy Bunny logo, so I had to add a little embroidery over to define those fingers a little bit better. And then we're going to work our pom-pom, which is done with all of the colors in the hat, again to sort of symbolize that unity and people from all backgrounds coming together, loving each other, not bullying. So yeah, the hat itself, I mean, it's really, I tried to make it as meaningful as possible. Blue actually represents solidarity, and that's kind of the reason that Lion Brand chose it for this campaign. So I was thinking solidarity, coming together, not bullying, not making fun of people who have differences than you, and more so embracing those differences in each other and celebrating them. So that's how I sort of was inspired to design this guy. Yeah, so I'll show you how to make this pom-pom using the pom-pom maker, and also how to do it just using your hands, which is a pretty cool technique. And if you don't have one of these around and you don't have time to buy one, then hands will work just fine. So don't worry if you don't have one of these. Okay, so let's get started. This is a little chart that we will use to work the embroidery and the duplicate stitch. So you'll definitely want to make sure that if you can't print this out, I'd probably use graph paper and try to draw it out yourself, because it makes it a lot easier when you can kind of mark off the rows, and it's just easier to do if it's not on a computer screen. Yeah. Okay, and the last page of the pattern is just a couple different views of the hat so you can see all of the hands. It was kind of difficult to capture in one photo, so I took it from different perspectives. Okay, so now we will begin. And get this out of the way. Okay, so for my cast on, I used a long tail cast on. I pretty much always work from the center of the ball rather than the outside, so that the ball of yarn doesn't roll around everywhere. So once you've taken your label off, what I like to do is pull out a little bit of the outer edge and then sort of wrap that around the skein. and tuck the little end under so it doesn't unravel further. And then sometimes this works beautifully and sometimes you pull out a giant wad of yarn, but you try to reach in for that inner end, kind of feel around. This was a fairly successful go. So again, as we're working this pattern, the yarn is just going to pull really nicely out of the ball and it won't roll around. So as I said, for this guy and for most hats, I generally use a long tail cast on just because it's pretty fast. It makes it nice and stretchy edge. Okay, I'm just gonna cut that off so I don't have to deal with it. Okay, so I'm gonna pull out, I like to be pretty generous when I'm doing long tail cast on with how much yarn I use, just because I never really know how it's gonna work out and I don't wanna get almost finished with my stitches and run out of yarn. So pull out a nice long tail. If you've never done long tail cast on, I would highly recommend giving it a try. I only started using this a couple of years ago. Before I did long tail, I was always using what's called the cabled cast on, which is similar to the knitted cast on, and it creates a really beautiful edge that looks really similar to a bind off edge too, so it'll make your project look really symmetric. But this is super fast, so ever since I started using this, I've gotten a little lazy and I pretty much only use long tail cast on now, unless the pattern specifies otherwise. But since I'm writing my own patterns, hey, I can do what I want. So we are going to slip. And I should probably show you, if you're a total beginner and you're going through this knit along with us, apologies if I go too fast through any of the steps. Please do send me a note. I'm going to try and take step-by-step photos as well, so you can reference those if you need, more time to look at the different steps than I'm going to give you in this video. So to work a slip knot, it's pretty easy. You just basically create a loop, and then you're going to pass the end, one of the tails through, pull it. It's called a slip knot because you can pull the tail in or out to increase or decrease the size of the loop. So we are going to slip that on our needles. You want your tail end to be on the top part here, and what's called the working yarn, which is the one that's coming out of the ball, to be on the bottom. You're going to take your left hand here and ball up your fingers here, stick out your pointer and your thumb, slip those in between the strands of yarn here and hold the rest of the yarn loosely with your 3 fingers. And then you're going to lift your thumb up like this, scoop over this side, and then under that one, and then let it go a little bit. Gently pull it. You don't want this to be too tight. If your cast on is too tight, it's going to be really, really difficult to work the first row. So what I like to say is you want to make sure that each of these stitches is big enough for your other needle to be able to pass up into it. So try to make them nice and loose. So again, we're going to slip these 2 fingers in here and hold the rest with our other 3 fingers. You're going to turn it this way, move this over, scoop up the second one, and lightly tug on it. So over, up. Also, side note, I have the shakiest hands on the planet, so you can expect to see a lot of shaking going on during these videos, and I apologize now. So we are going to continue this process until we have 80 stitches. I'm using these lace needles, which are really super sharp, and so sometimes it splits the yarn. So I've got to be a little careful with these stitches. Okay, make sure I'm counting correctly. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15. Great. So now we have all of our stitches on our needles, and as you can see, I still have quite a long tail left over, so because I don't want that to kind of interfere and annoy me the entire time, I'm going to cut it a little bit shorter. And I'm just going to sort of arrange my stitches evenly around the needle. Make sure that they're not twisted. So I'm going to move my yarn over here actually now, because When I'm casting on, I like my yarn working stuff to be coming from the left side, but when I'm knitting, your yarn should be on the right side. And make sure you can recognize the difference between your tail and your working yarn so you don't get started accidentally using your tail. I've done that many times. So we got to make sure that our stitches are not twisted, so the little edge of the fabric should all be kind of facing inward. Okay, great. So as you can see, stitches are not twisted. Now we're going to add our little stitch marker here. You can also use a little scrap piece of yarn that you just tie into a little circle too if you don't have a stitch marker. So I've used hair ties, all sorts of things in a pinch when I'm like in a car or on a trip or something and I forget my stitch markers. I've used many very strange things that will loop around a needle to help me mark my stitches. So when you're joining something in the round, you literally just need to start working around. And the edge of the hat is worked in a knit one, purl one rib. So that means we're going to knit the first stitch, purl the second one, knit, purl, and alternate all the way around. We should end with a purl stitch since we have an even number of stitches. So the hat's going to be really lovely and seamless all the way around. So to do the knit stitch, you're going to insert your right needle up into the first stitch and you're going to loop the yarn around, dip your needle down and slip it off. When you're switching in between a knit and a purl stitch, you need to move your yarn forwards and backwards depending on which stitch you're about to work. In knitting, as you can just see, the yarn is in the back. When you do a purl stitch, you have to move the yarn forward and you're going to insert your right needle down into the stitch, loop this around and lift it off. And you're just going to alternate in between knitting and purling. And you're going to work all the way around the hat. My hands are super sweaty right now because it's like 98 degrees in New York City and not the best time to be working with yarn. And I can't have my air conditioner on because then you guys wouldn't be able to hear me because it's so loud. So this is a little sticky, but we're going to work through it together. Some noise out on the street. Don't know if you can hear that. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and I'm going to work all the way around and I will meet you guys back at the end of this round. And we're back. Okay, so I have worked the first round of rib stitch all the way around to where I've placed the marker at the beginning of the round. So to begin this next round, all you have to do is literally slip that marker over to the right side and begin the next round. It's the exact same instructions as the first round, which is just knit one, purl one, all the way around. And if you kind of forget which stitch you're on, or you sit your work down for a second, pick it back up and have no clue which one you're on without having to count all the way back to the beginning of the row, all you have to do is look at the stitch before. I don't know if you guys can see this, but purl stitches have this little bump and knit stitches have a little V. So you want to just continue working the same stitch stacked on top of each other to create the ribbed effect. So if you get to a stitch like this, you know it's a purl and you need to move your working yarn forward to work that stitch. And if you get to a little V, you know that it's a knit stitch. So then you move your yarn back, which I just did automatically, and do a knit stitch. So we're just going to keep going around and around and around until we have 4 inches of work. And again, every time you get to this little stitch marker, you just slip it over, and that's just going to help you keep track of how many rounds you've done. So we're looking for 4 inches here of this ribbed cuff, and you guys have 1 week to complete all of that, which shouldn't be too difficult. This is really similar, not exact, but really similar to the way my mariner's cap begins. It's also worked in a knit one, purl one rib, but it's reversed, so it starts with a purl stitch, which is very important for when you get to the shaping part of that hat, because the instructions are based on if you've started with a purl. So if you're ever working that pattern, make sure you start purl one, knit one instead of knit one, purl one. Anyway, so this guy, we're gonna do 4 inches. You got 1 week to do it, and what I was gonna say is I love the mariner's cap. I love making them. All my friends make mariner's caps over and over again because it's actually kind of fun to switch back and forth. There's something really gratifying about building a ribbed hat. I don't know what it is, but I love it, and so does everyone else I know, so it's not just me. Yeah, so guys, let's do this. I can't wait to start seeing all of your photos on social media. Don't forget to tag Hat Not Hate and also Peace Hat KAL. I'll be sharing certain photos via Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and stuff, so make sure you're following me on all those platforms. On Facebook and Instagram, I'm at 2 of Wands, and on Twitter, I'm at 2 of Wands Knits, because 2 of Wands was taken. And yeah, so start sharing your photos. If you've got some gauge swatches going on, if you're just choosing your yarn, if you're already working on the hat, let's see all the photos. I want to see step-by-step stuff, guys. So yeah, also feel free to email me, alexandra@twoofwands.com, if you have any dire need questions. And reach out to other people too who are working on the KAL if you have a question and I'm not able to answer you right away. Hopefully we've created a little bit of a community of you guys all working on this together, so reach out via Instagram, share your photos, get your friends together, have some knit nights, and let's just have fun and make as many of these guys as we can, and lots of other blue hats. We can also send them back to Lion Brand. They're collecting blue hats to then donate to a school in New York City where all the kids are going to wear the hats on October 1st, which is Worldwide Anti-Bullying Day. And then the whole month of October is Anti-Bullying Month. So make some hats for yourself, make some hats for your kids and your friends and your family, and then send some back to Lion Brand too. Encourage people in your communities to make and wear blue hats to help prevent bullying and also just start a conversation and start educating everyone. I think this is a great way. It's the newest movement in craftivism, which is like the best word ever. So I hope you guys enjoy this, and I can't wait to see what you're making. So make sure to tag me too. Also, if you tag Crew of Wands, instead of 2 of Wands, it's my crew, then I also give away a free pattern each month. I share a photo that I randomly select from people who have used Crew of Wands to tag their projects made using my patterns, and I'll share that photo, and I'll also give that person a free pattern. So make sure you're also tagging Crew of Wands if you want to be in the running for those. And I will see you guys next week when we're going to start working the whole body of the hat, which is just knitting all the way around every row it gets around, rather. It's pretty easy. It's a great thing to do while you're watching Netflix. I know everyone loves to knit flicks these days. So put on your favorite show and prepare to just binge watch something while you're working straight up the hat in all knit rounds. Okay, I will see you guys next week. Thanks so much.